Snow swept across the high plains like ghosts without rest. Dawn bled slowly through a sky the color of tarnished silver, and the world seemed to hold its breath beneath the weight of winter. In that frozen hush, Clara May Harlow stood alone before the cabin her father had built, her palms pressed flat against the rough pine boards, as if touch alone could keep them from vanishing. Frost bit her fingertips, but she didn't move. Even her tears froze halfway down her cheeks, glittering like small betrayals in the morning light. She heard them before she saw them. Hoofbeats muffled by snow, the creak of leather, the weary cough of a horse that had ridden too far on too little warmth. Sheriff Whitlock dismounted first, his breath curling through the air like smoke from an old chimney. Beside him rode Jeb Cartwright, the banker's assistant, face red and smug against the cold. Between them hung the silence of something already decided. "Morning, Miss Harlow," the sheriff said gently, his voice half apology, half duty. "You know why we're here." Her throat felt packed with ash. "There's still time," she whispered. "If you just—" Jeb shook his head, gloved hands tightening on the reins. "Time's what your daddy ran out of last spring. We've waited longer than most." Behind them, a few townsfolk lingered at the edge of the road, bundled shapes watching from beneath their scarves. Clara could feel their stares as sharp as sleet. She wanted to vanish into the snow, but instead she stood straighter, the cold burning her lungs. "This cabin's all I've got," she said quietly. "It's the only thing that remembers him." The sheriff's eyes softened. "I know, child." He took a folded paper from his coat pocket, edges damp with frost. But the banks claimed it now. The land, too. The paper fluttered once in the wind before she took it. It felt heavy as stone, heavier than grief. She didn't read the words. She didn't need to. They were written in the cold already, carved into the air she breathed. The murmurs started then. Hushed voices from the onlookers. Pity laced with relief that it wasn't them. "Poor girl," someone whispered. "Should have married sooner." Another voice, colder. "Ain't right. Living alone out here. Folks'll talk." Clara turned her face away. Pride was the last thing her father had left her, and she clung to it even as the rest of her world collapsed. The wind caught the hem of her skirt and whipped it around her legs, filling the silence with its lonely cry. Then, through that pale roar, came the slow sound of hooves, measured, deliberate, cutting clean through the gossip. The crowd turned as one. A tall figure on a black horse approached from the road leading to the upper ranchlands. His hat brim was low, his coat dark as spilled ink against the white world. Snow dusted his shoulders, melting and freezing again as he rode closer. "Silas Boone," someone muttered, and the name passed through the crowd like the crackle of a distant fire. He was the kind of man the town had built its stories around, a war-scarred rancher with more land than warmth, a man who spoke little and loved less. Some said he kept to himself because the ghosts of his past wouldn't share his table. Others said he simply preferred his own company to the noise of people who hadn't earned his silence. He drew his horse to a stop near Clara's gate. His eyes, gray as the storm clouds gathering above, took in the scene without surprise. "Morning, Sheriff," he said quietly. His voice carried the low weight of someone who'd seen too much to raise it. "Morning, Boone." The sheriff nodded, uncertain. "Didn't expect you down this way?" "Rode in for feed," Silas replied. His gaze shifted to Clara. "Didn't figure I'd find winter biting this hard." She met his eyes for the first time then. There was no kindness in them, not yet. But there was no cruelty either. Only something still and unreadable, like the calm before lightning. "They're taking my home," she said, more to the air than to him. "Because I can't pay what I never had." Silas dismounted slowly. The leather of his gloves creaked. "That's so." Jeb stepped forward, puffed with self-importance. "She's had months, Boone. Ain't your concern." The rancher's eyes cut to him. Cold, deliberate. "Seems like concern's in short supply these days." No one spoke. The snow fell harder, whispering against their hats, settling on Clara's hair like a pale crown of sorrow. For a moment, the world held still again. Then Clara, desperate beyond sense, stepped closer. "You've got more land than you can see from your own porch," she said. "If you could lend me enough to keep the cabin through winter, I'll work it off come spring." Silas studied her. The air between them felt alive, charged with something fragile and dangerous. "Work it off," he repeated softly, like he was testing the shape of her words. "I can sew, mend, cook," she continued, her voice trembling but fierce. "I don't need charity, just a chance." He looked past her to the cabin, to the sagging roof and smokeless chimney, then back at her face, pale and unflinching against the wind. "If I help you," he said finally, "you'll owe me more than work." The sheriff frowned. "Boone," But Silas didn't take his eyes off Clara. "You want to keep this home?" Her breath came quick and visible, a trembling cloud between them. "Yes," he nodded once. "Then be my wife." The words dropped like stones into still water. No sound but the wind. No movement but the drifting snow. Even the sheriff's hand froze on his reins. Jeb's mouth fell open, the onlookers gasped, and Clara just stood there, stunned into stillness. "Sir? That's—" the sheriff began, but Silas's glance silenced him. Clara's heart thudded so loud she thought it might echo off the trees. "You can't mean that," she said softly. "I don't speak for jest," he replied. "I've got a house too quiet for one man. You've got a home about to be taken. Seems winter brought us both to the same edge." Her eyes filled with tears that stung like sleet. "You'd marry a stranger out of pity?" "Out of reason," he said, "and maybe a bit of mercy, but only if you can live with the trade." The silence that followed stretched thin and trembling. Then he turned, swung into the saddle, and rode off through the snow, leaving only the trail of his horse and a townful of murmurs in his wake. That night, Clara sat alone by the fire, her father's coat draped around her shoulders. The cabin creaked under the wind, and through the window, she watched the world blur into white. The proposal replayed in her mind until it didn't sound like madness anymore, just another kind of survival. By morning, the sheriff came again, hat low against the cold. "You don't owe him your life, girl," he said gently. "I already owe it to no one," she replied. "Maybe that's the loneliest debt of all." She packed her few things into a worn satchel, the blue ribbon her mother had worn, a chipped mug, a single photograph of her father. Each item felt like the closing of a chapter. When she stepped outside, the air cut clean and sharp. The world bathed in a silence so deep it almost hurt. The road to Silas Boone's ranch wound through the white hills like a scar. She followed it with steady steps, leaving a trail of footprints that the wind tried, and failed, to erase. By the time she reached his gate, the light had gone thin and gold, the sun bleeding its last warmth into the snow. The ranch stretched wide before her, fences rimed with frost, horses standing like dark statues in the fading light. Smoke curled from the chimney of the house, a rare sign of life in that vast solitude. She hesitated only once, her hand on the gate latch before pushing it open. The hinges groaned like an old secret. He met her at the door, lantern light spilling over his face. His eyes widened slightly, not in surprise, but as if acknowledging a truth he had already guessed. "You came," he said. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "You offered me a choice. I've made it." He stepped aside, letting her pass. The warmth of the fire met her like a physical thing, thawing the ache in her bones. He took off his coat and placed it gently around her shoulders without a word. The gesture felt heavier than any vow. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing the world beyond their door. Inside, silence built something fragile and new between them. A beginning forged not in passion, but in need, quiet as breath, strong as winter. The night stretched long, and though no words were spoken, something in the air shifted, like a match struck in the dark, too small to see but bright enough to be felt. In the stillness, the narrator's voice seemed to rise from the drifting snow itself. "Sometimes mercy doesn't come with kindness. It comes with choice, and when two souls stand in the cold long enough, they find warmth in the strangest places." And as the firelight flickered against the walls of Silas Boone's cabin, the story of that winter, of loss, pride, and the quiet beginning of something that might one day be called love, had only just begun. The days passed like measured breaths, one blending into the next under the same pale sky. The cabin, once too big for one man, now felt suspended between two silences, his and hers. The fire cracked softly each night, breaking that hush for a moment before fading again into the rhythm of wind and heartbeat. Clara May moved through the rooms as if she were afraid to wake something sleeping. Silas Boone carried the air of a man who'd long forgotten how to speak of anything that mattered. Yet, beneath the surface of their quiet routine, something unseen began to take root. She woke before dawn, her breath ghosting above the quilts. The stove needed tending, and Silas always rose early for the horses. She'd watch from the window as he crossed the yard, shoulders bowed beneath his coat, each motion deliberate and weary. The snow never seemed to touch him. It melted before it reached his skin, as if even the cold respected his distance. When he returned, his boots trailed the scent of cedar smoke and frost. And though he never said good morning, he always set a steaming cup of coffee on the table in front of her. It became a ritual, his silence an offering, hers a reply. The townsfolk had begun to talk again. Martha June's voice carried easily down the main street. thick with envy and disdain. "She's just a charity wife," she said one day, loud enough for the general store to hear. "Bought herself comfort with a wedding band." The words followed Clara like a shadow, though she never repeated them. The shame pressed heavy, but not unbearable. She had weathered worse storms than gossip. What stung sharper was that Silas heard too. He'd walked in behind her that morning, gathering supplies, and the murmur had cut through the room like glass underfoot. He didn't speak, only placed his coin on the counter and said, "We'll take everything she's made." At first, she didn't understand. It wasn't until they were home and she unpacked the goods that she found her own hand-sewn scarves, mittens, and small quilts, all bought by him. "These are mine," she said softly. "They're yours," he replied, "and now they're paid for. No one'll say you're living on pity." Something in her chest shifted, not with affection, not yet, but with a strange, trembling gratitude. He had defended her the only way he knew, without words, without warmth, but with an act that spoke truer than both. Winter deepened. The wind hardened. The snow glittered cruelly under the moon, and the long nights tested every soul on the plains. The fire burned smaller each evening. Wood grew scarce, and the world seemed to draw inward. Yet in that narrow space of survival, small mercies began to bloom. Silas started fixing the hinges on the pantry door because they creaked too much when she moved. She began leaving his supper by the fire instead of the table because he ate late, always after the horses were fed. Neither thanked the other. They didn't need to. One night, the blizzard came down from the mountains without warning, a white wall swallowing sky and ground alike. The horses screamed in the barn, and Silas, already shrugging into his coat, said he had to see to them. "Stay inside," he told her, voice calm but firm. The wind'll cut through a body faster than a knife, but hours passed. The fire thinned to coals, and the window pane rattled with gusts that sounded almost like voices. When the barn door slammed open in the gale and didn't close again, Clara couldn't sit still. She lit a lantern and pulled on her boots, wrapping herself in his heavy coat that still smelled faintly of pine and saddle oil. The storm hit her like a living thing, cold fangs on her face, snow clawing at her eyes. "Silas!" she cried, but her voice vanished into the roar. She forced herself toward the barn, each step a battle against the wind. The door swung wide, its hinges shrieking. Inside, the horses shivered, their flanks slick with frost. Silas lay half-collapsed beside a broken beam, snow already gathering on his shoulders. She dropped to her knees beside him, the lantern's flame trembling against the dark. His skin was ice-cold, his breath shallow. "Silas," she whispered, shaking him, "don't you dare leave me now." He stirred faintly, eyes half-lidded. "Didn't think anyone would come," he muttered, the words dragging like stones through water. "Of course I came," she said fiercely. "You gave me a home. I'm not letting it fall apart." It took every ounce of strength she had to haul him inside, the wind fighting her every step. She got him to the hearth, stripped away the soaked coat, rubbed his hands until her own went numb. When his eyes finally opened again, they fixed on her face, softened now, uncertain. "You could have stayed," he murmured. "I could have," she said, feeding another log to the fire, "but I didn't." He watched her for a long time, the flicker of flames painting gold across his scars. "You remind me of her," he said finally. "My wife." She had that same look when storms came, like she'd stare the whole sky down until it broke. Clara didn't speak. The moment didn't need words. The fire cracked softly. The snow hissed against the windows. He reached for her hand, hesitant, unsteady, and she let him. For the first time, silence didn't feel like distance between them. It felt like peace. Days later, when the storm broke, the world outside gleamed under a new coat of snow, untouched and almost holy. The air smelled of thaw, faint and promising. Word of what had happened drifted to town as all things did, reshaped by mouths that had once scorned her. The story became legend before the week was out. The girl who saved the rancher's life in the dead of winter. Even Martha June stopped speaking her name with venom. Sheriff Whitlock came by once, bringing mail and a respectful nod. "You've earned this place, Mrs. Boone," he said, the words thick with approval. "Don't reckon anyone will question it now," she only smiled. She had no need for the town's permission anymore. The only one who needed to believe in her already did. Spring crept in slow, like a shy visitor at the door. Snow melted into rivulets that carved through the earth, and the fields whispered green beneath the frost. The morning softened, and Silas began to speak more. He told her about the war, about the wife buried up on the ridge, about how he'd thought his heart was something long past mending. "Didn't figure I'd ever hear laughter here again," he said one evening, watching her hum to the horses. You still haven't, she teased gently, and he smiled, the kind of smile that looked like it had forgotten how but wanted to remember. When the first true spring sun spilled across the valley, he took her hand and led her to the porch. The air shimmered with that rare, delicate warmth that follows a bitter winter, the smell of wet soil and pine sharp and alive. He turned to her, eyes clear as the thawed river. You married me because I offered you shelter, he said quietly. I'd like you to stay because you want to. Her answer came not in words, but in the way her fingers tightened around his, the way her gaze didn't waver. I already chose to stay, she said softly, the day I walked through your gate. He reached up then, brushing a stray curl from her face, his touch almost reverent. Behind them, the world was waking, birds calling from branches, snowmelt whispering down the hills. That evening, as twilight gathered, Clara stood by the window and looked out across the land. The same hills that had once seemed endless now felt like home. Silas sat by the fire, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a small horse, his brow furrowed in thought. She realized then that love, real love, wasn't born in grand declarations. It was carved slowly, quietly, in the spaces between what was said and what was simply done. Outside, the snowmelt turned to mist that curled low over the fields. The narrator's voice, older now, softer, seemed to rise from the hush of that evening. There are winters that break a soul, and winters that teach it to bend. What began as mercy became devotion, and what began as need grew roots too deep for seasons to change. Clara moved to Silas's side, resting her head against his shoulder. The firelight danced on the walls, casting two shadows that leaned together, indistinguishable from one another. The story might have ended there, but life rarely does. It only shifts, like snow becoming water, water becoming bloom, and somewhere in that gentle transformation, two hearts that had once been strangers found not just warmth, but purpose. If you felt that warmth in their silence, let it linger. There are more Wild West tales waiting, more hearts thawing under winter skies. Subscribe, and keep riding with us through the stories that remind us, even in the coldest season, grace still finds a way home.